Hello. So, one of the things that I've been asked to talk about is how you define or how you look for what the criteria when rolling out a voice of customer program. I've used this slide. It really comes back down to why you're doing it. A lot of companies follow other companies, which means that my competitor's got a voice of customer program, so I should roll out a voice of customer program. But there has to be a greater purpose. Why are you doing it? If you're a telecoms company, you want to measure satisfaction because you believe satisfaction drives to longer term customer value. If you're a retailer, you might want to look at how you would fix things in the checkout. You have to understand why it is that you're going to do what you're going to do. So defining what it is and why you're doing it, but define your selection criteria. So how do we start to define that selection criteria? How do we get through it? Well, if you've got an existing program that you're trying to improve, you might want to start with a SWAT analysis. What are the things that we're doing well? What are the opportunities? And how can we move forward? If you don't have a program, then you have to start with a user story. What are the things that you would like to do? Is it your product owners want to drive product improvement? Do you want to drive sales? Start to gather requirements. Define your budget. So again, if you've got an existing program, you might have a budget that you've already got to work with. Otherwise, if you're starting afresh, what sort of money can you afford to spend? Because that really determines where you're going in the market, because it's a wide market. And then do your research. This is an evolving market. There's lots of new players coming in every year, and they're all improving. So start to do your research. So what's a sort of potential SWOT start to look like? So if I take the program that Sean and I started to roll out at EE, we start to look at the fact that we were really good at collecting NPS. We had lots of data. Weaknesses, we couldn't do many of the integrations. The data sets didn't start to speak to each other, and it became really difficult to do sort of theme analysis. We start to look at what opportunities we've got. We believe that if we started to do better integrations, our analysts could get to information faster, and therefore we can turn around and deliver more profit. The threats were that if we couldn't act faster, we might start to lose market share. So who should you be engaging? A voice of customer program starts to roll out well across not just digital, but how does that start to work with marketing? How does it start to work with your call centers? Depending on your business, there's different people you want to start to engage. In digital, we definitely want to be speaking to the digital product owners. We want to start to think about our market research team. So if there's usually always a market research team, our customer insights team that are sitting there. We want to start engaging them. We want to understand what they're doing, what crossover there is. We want to start to engage our procurement and legal teams up front. We want to know, are there any criteria that are going to hinder us selecting any particular vendor? So Sean touched on it there about privacy. We'll take that another stage further. Continental Europe, there's far more stringent criteria around where data's held. So a lot of the suppliers are American-based. Can you hold your data there? Then start to think of, well, okay, I'm going to introduce something into the website. How does that user experience, how does that fit in? Where can we host it? So voice of customer starts to stretch beyond, well, here's an invitational survey to persistent feedback. If you're going to have a persistent button across your website, you don't want that in a mobile setting, breaking your checkout. Senior management, you've got to get buy-in. If you're bringing on a new program or a new platform, then let's start engaging senior management. We need to get them involved. We need their buy-in, because at the end of the day, you don't want to start down your research phase only to find your project's not going to progress. IS and IT. So in the UK, we've started to merge digital divisions. Digital and business and technical are starting to merge, but in continental Europe, from my experience, those business functions and IT functions are still quite separate. So if you're going to introduce a new program, how are you going to get it delivered? How are you going to get it to the site? Once you've started to gather all of those different requirements, what you want to start to do is group them into themes. What are the core things that we need from that solution in order to actually drive business value? So start to theme. What do your themes start to look like? Well, potential output is user interface becomes important. The only way you're going to get real value out of a voice of customer program is taking it away from analysts and pushing it back into the business. So it can't be, that's an analyst job, it's everyone's job. we need to be listening to our customers. If we want to make incremental improvements, we need to know where the problems are so we can start to tackle them. Integration becomes a core function. Is that if you want to analyze all of this new information and new data, we need to be able to try and, where possible, put it into one place to help save time and effort to get to that information, that insight. Collection method, I touched on it before, is that voice of customer programs are definitely moving well beyond the traditional invitational survey. You've got persistent feedback, you've got exit surveys. Do you want to start integrating into your native apps? Do you want to start using email feedback that comes back in? It starts to go well beyond just an invitation on your website. Customization. How does it fit with your brand guidelines? Brand are going to sit there, be all over something. You can't put something on your site if you're a big corporate company that doesn't start to fit with your brand principles. You might want to then go beyond. Some survey providers, such as 4C, for example, are a little bit more rigid in the survey structure that you can have, whereas you might want to use it in a very different way. So customization starts to become an important theme. And then finally, client services. So if you're rolling out a new program, you don't have a team, are you wanting a solution or a vendor who can actually provide you third-party services to help drive that insight, to drive the best practices, to help you get the product up and running? You might have the team already, but client services usually becomes a key theme. Know your market. As I said, the market's very, very big. That you can easily go out and find 20 different survey vendors that all offer different types of solution. Understand what each survey provider can offer you, what their costs are, and start to do some upfront research. That will help you actually get to your vendor faster. So how do you do that? As I say, initial phase, start to gather your requirements, start to do a little bit of research, hone in on maybe 5, 6 vendors that you think meet your core criteria at a high level, and then start to take that down to how are you going to select your final vendor. I would advocate that you try to select 3 to 4 vendors that you want to take to the final stage, and then start to split it out into 2 core principles. First, get them to do a written exercise. Use your framework, build a framework from your most important criteria to your least important criteria, and then ask them to basically give you a written response, but then do a panel exercise where you start to bring those stakeholders that you've engaged across the business for one day for all of the vendors to present based on the criteria that you've defined up front. So it's not just your decision. You haven't decided that this is the best vendor. The business have bought into the solution. That's it, folks.
Thank you, Roman. So for this topic, the book that you selected was a more beautiful question. So why did you choose this book?
So I've chosen a more beautiful question because it starts with why. The how becomes quite easy. I believe that you should start looking to ask the right questions, because asking the right questions will actually define and help you improve as a business rather than trying to look at technology-focused books. It's about people. Start to ask questions that will help you get to better answers.
So do we have a first question for this one? First question, first book. No? No one is ready to ask a question? Everything was very clear? Okay, so we have to keep this book for maybe the next one. Nicolas, do you have some question for this one?
Would I get the book?
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay. So you described what were the criteria for selecting a tool, and we understood that the business objectives were key, but it was more general advice. What would be the specific or more specific criteria for a retailer, for example?
So, as I maybe touched on earlier, depending on where you are, so if you're a retailer bringing on a voice of customer program, chances are you should focus more on a tactical survey solution as opposed to trying to measure NPS. NPS as a satisfaction metric is useful, but try to get persistent feedback. Your value is going to come from the fact that you've got a high transactional website, so try and find your tactical fixes, the bugs that aren't obvious. So if if I take an example, which I'll touch on later, is when we first launched the new website at EE, we found quite quickly from tactical persistent feedback that there was an issue within our checkout. We weren't aware of that, but our customers were able to respond and tell us that the payment page wouldn't load. We managed to get a fix out in 48 hours as opposed to weeks and months. That's where you add value as a retailer, is trying to find your tactical fixes.
And what about selecting vendors? Because I understood that you can choose even a free one, let's say Monkey Survey or something like that. SurveyMonkey, and the other one, 4C, is more expensive, I think. So what would be the good idea, to start with a free one or not?
A lot of it comes down to the size and scale of the business, the size of the opportunity. Voice of customer or any program or any initiative should have a return on investment or a return on effort. So you can start with a free tool, but the chances are if you're a large FTSE 100, which is, you know, basically puts you in the top 100 companies in the UK, you wouldn't start with a free tool. And you wouldn't start with a free tool on the basis that there's a lot of hurdles to navigate. There's a lot of selection criteria, and the chances are you're not going to be able to get that through procurement and legal because they won't have the support teams to get you there. So a lot of it will come back down to where are you as a business, what size are you as a company. And most mid-market tools will provide, you know, all the selection criteria you need to meet. So your Campiles, your opinion labs of this world will all meet that criteria. You would only start moving into companies like 4C, where you're starting to spend, you know, in excess of 200,000 euros a year. If you're starting to do predictive modeling on the back of this, you're really serious about your voice of customer program, where you want to try and understand the next best action. You want to start to deliver, you know, more tailored content and go well beyond. And that's probably not a place to start for any retailer.
Thank you. So one last chance for a book. Do we have a question in the room? No? No one wants to dare to ask one?
Did you really understand? Okay, there is one question. Even a simple one is enough.
Regarding the voice of customers, would you say that if you collect answers to open questions, it is much more difficult than closed questions?
So closed questions are usually good for measurement and metrics to trend. Open questions are harder to do, but most voice of customer tools these days will help you cluster in theme and basically do word sentiment analysis that allow you to try and actually use that in a more constructive way. So traditional tools started out by just counting the number of times a word was used, versus now they start to actually do sentiment analysis to say, well, actually, in what context was that word used? So the more modern tools will actually help and visualize that for you, so the end audience can actually use and do something with it, so you don't have to mine text data.
Okay. It's because Nicolas says that there is several vendors of solutions. If you want to use open questions, then you better have an NLP system integrated to it to be able to analyze the content.
Yes, so if you wanted to go for mid-market solutions, most mid-market solutions will allow you to do taxonomies and structures, whereas entry-level solutions won't. They'll just allow you to collect information, and you have to mine it yourself.
Do you have one last question, or can we move on with next topic? One last question? Okay, so we can move on to topic number 3. What are the top KPIs and questions? Jingle, please.